Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Danger of American Fascism. If you've noticed on the top left there, this was done by Henry A. Wallace in 1944, around the time that I believe FDR was getting his fourth election. He would die soon afterwards. However, the fact is that the Democratic Party was at its strongest when it was at its most liberal. For the most part, Henry A. Wallace is a gentleman who worked as the vice president of FDR, but then was replaced with Harry Truman, so he had time to essentially create articles and editorials. And this one was a very good one because you began to see what a fascist was. Now, what is a fascist here? How many fascists have we? How dangerous are they? And of course, you can't tell how many fascists we have right now, except to say that they exist both with the Democratic as well as the Republican Party. But just think about it. A fascist is one whose lust for power, money or power is combined with such an intensity of intolerance towards those of other races, parties, classes, religions, cultures, regions, or nations as to make him ruthless in his use of deceit or violence to attain his end. The supreme god of a fascist, to which his ends are direct, may be money or power, may be a race or a class, may be a military clique or an economic group, or maybe a culture, religion, or political party. Now, I won't go through every last one of these, but there are various nuggets of gold, because some things that you begin to learn about American fascists is that they prefer not to use violence. His method is to poison the channels of public information. Who does that sound like? Well, the fascists, the problem is never how best to present the truth to the public, but how best to use the news to deceive the public into giving the fascist and his group more money or more power. And of course, if you look at who the fascists are here in the United States, you'll be very surprised to understand who their names are just off the top of your head. Now, of course, I don't talk about just the Republican Party, because American fascism will not be really dangerous until there is a purposeful coalition among the cartelists, the deliberate poisoners of public information, and those who stand for the KKK type of demagoguery. Think about the fight against Muslims. Think about Karl Rove or Roger Ailes and their deliberate poisoners of public information. Think about cartelists like Mitt Romney, who went to through the LIBOR scandal and went to Europe, the UK, and actually asked for money. Think about that. Now, of course, here I can't sit down and say much about Latin America because in number 8, fascism is a worldwide disease. Its greatest threat to the United States will come after the war, either via Latin America within the United States itself. Another danger represented by those who pay lip service to democracy and the common welfare in their insatiable greed for money and the power which money gives do not hesitate surreptitiously to evade the laws designed to safeguard the public from monopolistic extortion. American fascists of this stamp were clandestinely aligned with their German counterparts before the war and are even now preparing to resume where they left off after the present unpleasantness ceases. Now think about this. At this time in the 1930s, there was the Fred Koch, who was actually very influential in the Stalinist regime. As well, I believe Ayn Rand would become a staple with her libertarian message or objectivist message, whichever you want to say. Now, I would like to go on and say that American fascists are most easily recognized by their deliberate perversion of truth and fact. Their newspapers and propaganda carefully cultivate every fissure of disunity, every crack in the common front against fascism. It's going to be very interesting. I mean, this guy was talking about this long before the 1970s and 1980s when we had Ronald Reagan, claimed to be a super patriot, but would destroy every liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. They demand free enterprise, but are the spokesmen for a monopoly invested interest. And of course, their final objective toward which all their deceit is directed is to capture political power so that, using the power of the state and the power of the market simultaneously, they may keep the common man in eternal subjection. This is a very strong man who was very strong before George McGovern went into World War II. So a very true blue liberal who would have actually used democracy for good other than what Harry Truman used it for. I mean, He did have his good parts, but the man was a warmonger, unfortunately, and led to, say, the CIA being created, among other branches of the government. Of course, one of the ones that I want to really get into would be number 14, which is democracy to crush fascism internally must demonstrate its capacity to make the trains run on time. It must develop the ability to keep people fully employed and at the same time balance the budget. It must put human beings first and dollars second. Now, what is wrong with this picture? It must appeal to reason and decency, and not to violence and deceit. We must not tolerate oppressive government or industrial oligarchy in the form of monopolies and cartels, something that, unfortunately, has not been done. As long as scientific research and inventive ingenuity outran our ability to devise social mechanisms to raise the living standards of the people, we may expect the liberal potential of the United States to increase. If this liberal potential is properly channeled, we may expect the area of freedom of the United States to increase. The problem is to spin up our rate of social invention in service of the welfare of all people. Now, of course, here he talks about the worldwide struggle between fascism and democracy will not stop, and he is absolutely correct. Democracy can win the peace, but it has to do two things. Speed up the rate of political and economic invention so that both production and distribution can match in their power and practical effect on the daily life of the common man. In other words, focus on the middle class, and vivify the greatest intensity the spiritual processes which are both the foundation and the very essence of democracy. Find out what happens with the middle class, what works for the middle class, help them to bring up, or even work to help the poor and bring them up. A rising boat works with all tides. I believe that's the old saying, but I'm not positive. Still, bring up the middle class and you'll bring up democracy. The moral and spiritual aspects of both personal and international relationships have a practical bearing which so many practical men deny. Until democracy and effective enthusiastic action fills the vacuum created by the power of modern inventions, we may expect the fascists to increase in power after the war both in the United States and in the world. It's very odd, but he says it. Fascism in the post-war inevitably will push steadily for Anglo-Saxon imperialism and eventually for war with Russia. Already, American fascists are talking and writing about this conflict and using it as an excuse for their internal hatreds and intolerances toward certain races, creeds, and classes. Now, nowadays, it's Iran. In his day, it was Russia. And even now, we're still fighting for 1950s Russia under Mitt Romney. And finally, it should also be evident that exhibitions of the native brand of fascism are not confined to any single section, class, or religion. Happily, it can be said that as yet, fascism has not captured a predominant place in the outlook of any American section, class, or religion. It may be encountered in Wall Street, Main Street, or Tobacco Road. I'm not sure where Tobacco Road is, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Some even suspect that they can detect incipient traces of it along the Potomac. It is an infectious disease. We must all be on our guard against intolerance, bigotry, and the pretension of invidious distinction. But if we put our trust in the common sense of common man, with malice toward none and charity for all, go forward on the great adventure of making political, economic, and social democracy a practical reality, we shall not fail. And of course, I believe that Henry Wallace was absolutely right in everything that he had to say here. You can poison the channels of public information. The perfect type of fascist is the people that have hatred for other races and allegiance to a military clique. I would love to hear what others have to think. Was Henry Wallace crazy? Was he smart? Was he not smart? What do you think? See you next time.